Welcome everyone back to the last session before we conclude Diversity Data Deep Dive. And I'm pleased to welcome Gabrielle Mead, who is the Assistant Director and the Deputy Title IX Coordinator with EOAA, which is our Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action Office. And this presentation will focus on EOA's annual report, summarizing its work to address discrimination, harassment, and sexual misconduct, and also explain the university's affirmative action obligations and the goal setting tool that EOA has developed. Thank you, Gabrielle, for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you all. I'm Gabrielle. I work in EOAA. I've been in that office for about 10 years. And I have a lot to go over with you and a short amount of time. So I think I will just dive in and tell you a little bit about our office and about our data that we have. So let's see, there we go. So we have, I've listed here on the PowerPoint our key roles. The first is, as you probably have heard by now, we respond to reports of sexual misconduct, and that's all of the concerns about sexual misconduct at the university, whether the conduct is allegedly engaged in by a student or by an employee. So that's a really big part of the work that we do. We also, another really big part of the work we do is to respond to reports that employees have engaged in discrimination or harassment based on protected identities like race, gender, age, disability, religion, things like that, as well as nepotism and retaliation that's related to discrimination, harassment, and sexual misconduct. So that's a big chunk of our work. I would say the vast majority of our work falls into those two bullet points. And on that second one, we don't respond to student conduct in those areas, only employee conduct. We also have the affirmative action plan that's under our oversight. And so I think in today's presentation, I'm going to spend more time on that actually than on the first two, but we'll start with those first two bullet points, and I'll share with you some information on our annual report. We've actually only done an annual report. This will be hopefully we'll get it out soon, and this will be our 4th year doing an annual report. So you won't see a lot of data from before that, but I think we've really gotten, what we've tried to do is answer a lot of the questions that we get consistently about the work that we do in our office. So the kind of the baseline for our work in this area is that the university prohibits discrimination and harassment based on protected identities, nepotism, sexual misconduct, and related retaliation, and our role is to respond to those. So over the years, this is kind of an overview of our total caseload in the Twin Cities. You'll see that we had a big increase over the last couple of years, a little bit lower this year, and I put a star in that number because it's preliminary. It's kind of based on what I have so far, but I haven't, as you all know, if you're talking about data, it takes a while to make sure that all of those numbers are actually right and there's not duplicates and things like that. So when the report comes out, that'll be our final number, but that's where we are right now. And these include all of our discrimination, harassment, sexual misconduct cases, our employment-related cases, and our cases involving students. And we do it by fiscal year. On this slide, what I tried to do is, and again, I just took this from our annual report that is on our website. You can find the last few annual reports on our website. And you can see when we just look at the employment-related cases, how those break down in terms of identity-based concerns. The vast majority of our work, even here, is on sexual misconduct. And pretty consistently, our other big categories are race, national origin, disability, and gender. So that's been pretty consistent over the years. I would say between 10 and 13% in each of those categories over the last few years is my recollection off the top of my head. So this was 316 cases. That number is a little bit lower this year, but 316 is actually much higher than the 2 previous years. We've had a lot more reports to our office on those kinds of cases. The other kind of section on sexual misconduct that we look at in our, this is again breaking it down even further on the sexual misconduct cases that we see involving employees. And I'll just point out that the vast majority of cases that we get involving employees is sexual harassment. Occasionally we get a sexual assault or relationship violence case, but really the most of them we get is sexual harassment. You'll see, again, a big increase in the number of cases we've gotten on this topic over the last few years. I think it really kind of coincides with a lot of the Me Too movement and the public discussions around sexual misconduct in the workplace. They're high numbers, again, a little bit lower this year, but we do not investigate every single case. So we don't do a formal investigation. We do address a lot of these informally. They could be really egregious concerns, or it might be a inappropriate joke that's made in a staff meeting or in a classroom. Not okay, right? But maybe we don't need to do a full formal investigation with disciplinary action in order to address it in appropriate ways. And so you'll see, at least for FY19, we only did 22 formal investigations, and the vast majority of the cases that we handle in an informal way. The last slide related to our annual report data is on our student-related sexual misconduct cases. And you'll see a big jump here over the years in our numbers, and that really, I think, coincides closely with the 2018 sexual misconduct policy that had a pretty robust reporting requirement. And so there was a lot more reports that were made to our office about students experiencing sexual misconduct. Again, here you'll see that we don't do formal investigations in very many of those cases. Our goal is to make sure that students who are experiencing sexual misconduct get the information they need about resources, about supportive measures, about their options. And if they want to move forward, then we can move forward with a formal investigation. So that concludes my very quick overview of some of our, the majority of the work that we do in our office. And this is really focused on the Twin Cities campus. Last year, for the first time, we did a Duluth annual report because we do have a staff member on the Duluth campus. And so we'll keep those as separate annual reports. The other campuses numbers are not quite as high, so we try to reflect them some in our annual report in a separate section. So I'm just going to keep moving on to talk about affirmative action. And what I will, I'll just kind of explain to you is give you an overview of what our affirmative action obligations are. So because the university receives federal funds, we are obligated to follow certain federal regulations with respect to affirmative action. And that's actually true on the state level too, but I focus on federal because the state rules really track the federal rules. So to comply with these regulations, in a very simplistic way of explaining it, what we do is each year we take a snapshot of our employees, and then we group them into job groups that we think make sense. And we see how many employees in each of those job groups that we have. And then we break it down further to look at how many women, how many people in each of those job groups identify as women, how many identify as a person of color, American Indian, so BIPOC, how many identify as being an individual with a disability, and how many identify as being a protected veteran. And those are the 4 groups that we're required to track under the regulations. That, I just want to emphasize that this is one of our efforts around equity and diversity in hiring and retention and recruiting. But it's just one, right? We also have the discrimination policy that has a number of other protected identities that we need to be thinking about. And of course, we have strategic plans, right, that also are looking at these categories, I imagine, as well as others. But the reason that we are looking at in the affirmative action plan these 4 groups is because these are the 4 groups that the federal government has asked us to track. So while we are looking at our numbers and in those particular job groups, at the same time, what we are doing is we are following best practices, looking at relevant resources like census data to estimate who is available. We call it the availability data, who is qualified in the relevant job marketplace. So for some job groups, we might look at the local job market. Twin Cities. For some, we might look at the regional market, and some we look at the national market. And we look and see how many people who are qualified for that position identify as women or identify as BIPOC person, right? So we might look for one job group, we might look at the data, and we see that 70% of qualified people for this job are women. For another job group, we might see that that 30% of qualified people are women. And what we want to do at the university, in accordance with the federal regulations, is make sure that those match. That at the university, we have at least the percentage of people, of women in that position as are qualified in the market. I said number, I didn't mean to say number, it really is percentage. So if 70% of the qualified people in the relevant job market are women, then we want 70% of the people at the university in that position to be women. If the number out in the marketplace is 30, then we want 30% to be women in order to reach affirmative action goals. I don't want to suggest that we should stop there, but we want to make sure that we're reaching those goals. When they don't match, we say that we set a goal. And over time, on a macro level, we want to make progress on our goals, right? And if over time we are not getting closer to the percentage in the marketplace, right? If we continue to have a gap over and over and over again, that suggests that there might be discrimination at work there. And what it tells us is that what we need to do is look at what's not working. If we're saying the people are out there, but they're not getting there, where are we missing? Are we not recruiting them? Are they not in our pool? Or are they getting to our pool and not getting to the next stage? Or are they getting to the next stage and not getting hired? So we can use that data to make some assessments like that. So we do that assessment for availability for women and for people of color and Native Americans, American Indians. And you'll notice that I didn't mention individuals with disabilities or protected veterans, and that's because we do it a little bit differently for those groups. The government has told us that we can assume that for any job group, for any marketplace, you can assume that 7% of the qualified people have a disability. So our goal is to have 7% of people of employees in any job group be a person with a disability. The federal government has told us that for protected veterans, it's a little bit different. Same assumptions, but the number changes a little bit. Every year, the federal government looks to see what percentage of the civilian workforce is comprised of protected veterans. Right now, just last month, they changed, they adjusted every year. So right now, what they're saying is 5.6% of the civilian workforce consists of protected veterans. And the government tells us we can assume that for any job in any marketplace, 5.6% of qualified people will be someone with a protected veteran status. So our goal is for every position to have 5.6% of people in that position be a protected veteran. So these are kind of macro numbers, and they are not quotas. And I think that's important to mention too. And you can't make decisions based on race or gender or disability status or veteran status. So there's this, we have to think about both things, right? We have to think about we can't discriminate, and we have to be making progress on our goals. And so we're looking at this at kind of a macro level. So I'll kind of go through a few more slides here, and then I think what I'll do is I'll show you the tool that we're talking about. So these are just some overall numbers that I pulled just based on our most recent data. And it's looking at the university as a whole, all 5 campuses. And there's some breakdown by groups, but it's really pretty high level. And you'll see that we've increased our total employment of women by 0.5%. You will notice that that is a percentage, not a number. And so we are looking at those in percentages and not just pure numbers. On the twin and in the AA administrative roles, we've also increased. So we've increased in all job groups, some more than others. But when you look at the Twin Cities job groups, right? I talked about those job groups, and we have 45 job groups in AAAP. So those are those administrative professional positions. We have met our goals compared to what we see out in the market in 29 of those 25 job groups, but we have not met our goals in the others. We've increased our for the percentage of women that we've employed in faculty roles, but we have not met our goals in many. I didn't put all of them, but in many of those goals. Now they vary. The goals vary by subject matter, right? It's not, faculty doesn't have one goal because there are different percentages of women in different fields of study. So we're basing it on that. I think I'll skip that one just to keep moving along. I'll show you the BIPOC page, increased in all of those categories as well, but we still have a number of job groups where we haven't met those specific goals. And then I'll just point out that with individuals with disabilities, we have met and exceeded our goals in the labor represented and civil service job groups. I think one of them may have even hit 11%. You know, maybe not in every job group, but when you look at all the, if you look at all the civil service and labor represented employees together, we have met that goal. Overall, we're at 6.9%, so we're really close overall at the university. And this is one area that we can look at a percentage across the university because every job group is the same. But I will point out that with both in the faculty groups and in those administrative groups, we have not come close to 7%. So just something to keep in mind. So what do we do with all this? I will just also mention protected veterans because we do not do well with protected veteran hiring and retention. Our numbers of protected veterans have decreased over the years, and we are not anywhere close this is more about, so here we have protected veteran employees is at 1.6% overall. So that's just just to keep those areas in mind. So what I thought I would do next is to show you the goal setting tool and explain how that connects to what we're doing. And although it is called the EOAA Goal Setting Tool, I feel a little bit silly taking credit for it because it was really much more the work of the Office for Institutional Research and Mike Kill in particular, and the Office of Human Resources, Phil Klein, Diane Kistler, who did an extraordinary amount of work on this. They took a tool that we had previously and updated it, and it was great. So I'm going to share my screen again and show you another page and take you to MyU. And under MyU, if you go to the reporting center, and not all of you may have access to this, there are some, it's private data, and so there are restrictions. I'm going to show you some pretty high level stuff, so I think it'll be okay for the presentation. You go to the Human Resources section, Workforce Analysis, and go to EOAA, and there you see the EOAA Goal Setting Tool. So what this tool, you can certainly read the welcome page, but what this does is it allows you to find out what the availability is that we have figured out for a particular position. And the reason that we find this to be helpful is when you're doing a job search. So, for example, I just went this morning to a search committee where I shared the goals. I explained some of this information about the affirmative action plan and what our affirmative action obligations are, and I shared what the availability is by using the goal setting tool. You want to be thinking broadly, I think, about equity and diversity when you're doing searches. But this helps you to identify whether you might want to think about particular efforts around particular demographics based on the numbers that we have here and who we believe is available out in the marketplace. So if you go to the goal setting piece, so of course there's a lot of information on here. It's really good information that several of us worked on quite a bit. And what you'll see is we have a different report running for faculty and for staff. I'm going to pull up the staff one. And if you know your position number, which is different than the job ID, it took me years to figure that out. If you go onto the Human Resources website and find a job ID for something that's out on the a posting, that's the job ID. It's different than the position number. But if you know your position number, you can put it in here. And if you don't, this is a very, very exciting development in this tool. You can narrow it down by campus, by VP unit, by department, and then it'll give you some choices of position number. This is a very, very, very exciting for us. So I actually pulled up a position number this morning that I will just show you because there are a lot of people in there. And you can, depending on your, I think depending on what private data clearance you have, you can get different information. I'm going to keep it at campus and VP level just so we can see that from there. Actually, I'm just going to keep it at campus level. So we'll apply there, and I will walk you through what we see here. So what you can see here is this is the date of today's date, obviously. And the position that I pulled up was a payroll, a University of Services payroll position. And the way that we have categorized it, the job group that I mentioned that we put it in is a civil service accounting position, CS4A. Okay, so based on our research, we believe our best estimate is that of the people in the relevant marketplace, my guess is this one is a local marketplace, of the people qualified for this position, 69.7% of them are women in the marketplace. Based on our estimate, 23.8% of the people available, qualified for the position are people of color and Native Americans. So we call that the percent availability. Can you see this? Do I need to see if I can make it a little bigger? You'll see that 7%, right? You're going to see that anytime you run a report, it'll say 7% of the qualified people are individuals with disability, have a disability. You'll see that it says 5.7% here. I mentioned 5.6. That's because the federal government just updated that number last month, and we have not gotten around to updating it in the tool. So these are our goals, right? So when we look at how many people have this position at the university, our goal is to have 69.7% of them be women. Our goal is to have 23.8% of them be a person of color or Native American. From an affirmative action standpoint, our affirmative action goals, we may have other goals, grander goals, right? From a strategic standpoint, but from an affirmative action obligation standpoint, these are our goals. So what the report does is tell you who we have. So here you'll see that at the university, on our campus, this is a campus-wide, but like I said, you can break it down more. Campus-wide, on the Twin Cities campus, there are 403 people at the university with that job title. 280 of them are women. I should also mention that the government asks us to identify men and women and does not provide for any other gender category. So I recognize that that's an issue. I also will note that the definition of people of color and Native Americans is also prescribed by the government. So I'll just say that this is a compliance function, and that's where we are right now. So 280 of those 403 people are women in that position. That's 69.5%, pretty close to our goal, right? So 69.7%, this is our availability number. If you apply that availability number to our total head count, we should have, our goal would be to have 281.1 of the 403 be women. And so, because this number is higher than this number, we have a number to goal. In order to reach our goal, our affirmative action goal on women in this category, we would have to hire 1.1 more women. and then we would have reached our goal. Down here, we have employees with disabilities. Again, there are 403 people in the position. 39 have identified as having a disability. That's 9.7%. Oh, our percent availability is 7%. So if we were to just make our percent availability, our goal would be 28.2, because 28.2 is 7% of 403. Well, we have more than that. So our number to goal is 0, right? Because we have more than our goal. So, you know, and from an affirmative action standpoint, we don't have to focus on hiring of individuals with disabilities in that category. Over here, we see that, again, 403 people in the position, 84 of them identified as being an employee of color, Native American. That's 20.8%. Our availability, our estimate availability is that 23%, 23.8% would have that, would be of that 403 would be a person of color, a Native American. I have to move all of your faces over here so I can see. So that would be 96 people. We don't have 96, we have 84. And therefore we set a goal of 12. Well, our goal is 96. Our number to goal is 12, right? Because the number of people we have is less than what our goal is. And then finally, with protected veterans, we see again, the numbers are very low. We have quite a ways to go. So this just gives you, and over time, you know, the idea is that we would make progress on those, that those numbers should be going down. And if they're not, then we should be looking at what can we do to, you know, what's going on in our process that might be impeding this. Where can we make efforts to, you know, look at our job descriptions to make sure that they're reflecting the values of equity and diversity, and making sure that people know that they can, for example, get accommodations, that there are resources available for people's particular needs and interests. Are we recruiting in the right places? Are we posting in the right, you know, places to be attracting diverse candidates? How are we asking questions during interviews? How are we thinking about implicit bias? You know, so at each step of the way, we can think about how we are engaging in our process and how we might need to do things differently so that we can make progress on those goals. So, I wasn't sure I would make it in my time allotted.
Yeah.
I am happy to take questions if you have them.
We have one already. Shall we ask, is there a reason this information, general numbers, is not available to all employees?
So the affirmative action plan is available for employee review. I'm not sure that's what you're asking. You're asking about the tool. And it's not available to all employees because I picked a job group that has a lot of people in it. But the smaller you get, the smaller numbers you get, the more identifiable people become in those numbers. And that's your gender, race, disability status, veteran status, those are all protected identities. Those are all, that's private data, and the university can't release that. So if you have 5 people in the office and you run those numbers, and one of them comes up as an individual with a disability, then all of a sudden, you know, somebody has a disability, right? So I don't make those decisions. There is a group at the university to decide who gets what information. And I do think it has to do with, you know, how identifiable data sets are, how easily it is to identify particular people and their identities.
Follow-up question on that was just then, so would it be fair to ask for that information from an HR professional, and then they could decide whether or not the information was identifiable?
Yes.
Okay.
And particularly for search groups, I mean, what I've done is sometimes I might not give the particular data, but I can say, it looks to me like you've met your goals in these categories, but not on these, you know, something like that. Or even give, you know, I think looking at campus data is really useful. And it used to be that the tool only provided campus-wide data. And that's useful because we need to make progress as an institution. And, you know, you and your particular unit want to know what, how you're doing, right? Obviously, we look at it all together, but then you'll want to know what you're doing in your unit as well.
Thank
We're
you.
very decentralized.
If I can add to that, Shelby, I think for anyone who's especially serving in search committees or as part of diversity committees that are advancing equity and diversity hiring, I think it's an important piece to remember, because I was on a recent search committee and suggested that our committee look at the diversity of the pool and have our HR specialists supporting it, give us that diversity number. But then also, once we screen down to a smaller number, we again had them check on the diversity numbers there and all of that. But of course, the data that Gabrielle is talking about is even further upstream, right? Like it's already what their current hiring or, you know, the hires and how that reflects. So I think it's really important. And this is why I was really excited that Gabrielle was sharing this, because I'm not personally sure of how well this process is actually being applied across our institution. You know. So Edgar has a question. This information is quite interesting. How often are the availability numbers for the various protected classes updated? Annually?
Yes, annually. I will say that they probably could use some review in terms of matching. Right. So, you know, there's some kind of mapping done at some point, and it was several years ago. So, for example, in a particular faculty department, we look at the fine fields of study in the data and match it to the faculty in particular departments. And I think that there probably could be some revision done there, but annually is that we look at the data annually.
I have one more question if you have time, or do you have to go? Okay. Which is, you know, and Gabrielle, you know this, but the OED has a College Made initiative, which we partner with colleges across the Twin Cities campus, all 17 of them, and bring data to them around representational diversity. And in that data gathering and analysis, I've noticed how when you start to compare the diversity of our numbers in the student categories versus the faculty categories versus the staff categories, it seems like our staff are least diverse in terms of race, ethnicity. I think there are many more women, you know, in terms of gender. I think our staff tend to be more women, but and so those percentages lag from the faculty diversity and student diversity. Do you have a sense of, I mean, is that still happening? I know we've not done the data more recently, but are you, or do you think there's been increases in employee diversity, which would be skewed towards staff rather than faculty based on the data you showed us?
I don't know, Vrajta.
Okay.
I think I would have to go back and look at the actual numbers.
Right. And
I think we make steady but slow progress in all of our categories with dips along the way. Right.
That's helpful. I think this is why the data piece is so important. I think, you know, for us to kind of keep tracking. So any last questions for Gabrielle? Well, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up in a minute here, but thank you so much for making the time and sharing this. You know, other people will be watching by recordings and so on, and it'll be posted to our website. So thanks again for making the time for us.
Yes, thank you. And feel free to reach out if you have other questions.
Sounds great.
All right.
So thank you. So as we come to the end of today's diversity data deep dive, thank you for everyone who is still stayed on, and I hope if you've not seen some of the earlier sessions that you'll go back and watch them once we post them on our website. We'll probably send a email about it. So we have a feedback form for you, and you can take your time to fill it out, you know, after this. But we also have a Jamboard. I don't know if anyone has used this, but it's a really interesting tool. And we are looking for ideas for our next diversity data deep dive. And that is going to be in fall. And we haven't determined a date yet. If you have ideas about dates, feel free to add that in. And here are the instructions. You just have to click the Jamboard link and click on the fourth icon there and just add a sticky note and then type in there. So it's a fun tool to try. It's really great for perhaps for some of your gatherings and meetings. But in any case, we really appreciate your joining us, and we thank you for your time, but also thank all our partners, because this was really our collaborators from across the university volunteering to share the impressive work they're doing around diversity and data. And so we're very grateful for that, and also to the DCoP Assessment Committee, and my colleagues are here, and Shelby, Vic, Jabra, and then John Williams, who is the backbone of everything here, trying to bring it all together. So thank you again for attending, and hope you'll give us your feedback and your honest comments, and also give us suggestions for where we can go next with our diversity data deep dive. Have a good rest of the evening, afternoon, evening.